Hello everyone, this is Erik, the Asian movie enthusiast, and this is my review of Rage, also known as Anger or Ikari, a Japanese dramatic thriller from 2016 that has an excellent premise and an all-star cast. So a man brutally murders a married couple and leaves behind the words Ikari written with their blood. The killer then undergoes plastic surgery and flees. Now, we are then introduced to three different stories involving different characters at different locations in Japan. Each of these stories involves a male stranger who is new in town. One of these men is the killer, but who is it? So here's a brief summary of the three stories in the cast. At a fishing harbor in Chiba, an older man, played by Ken Watanabe, works at the harbor and looks over his emotionally troubled daughter, played by Aoi Miyazaki. His daughter begins to date someone, played by Kenichi Matsuyama, the new guy in town. In the second story, in downtown Tokyo, a gay man, played by Satoshi Tsumabuki, works at an advertising agency. He meets a lover, played by Go Oyano, and they begin to live together. Go's character is the new guy in town. And the third story takes place in Okinawa. A young girl, played by Suzu Hirose, and her mother move to an isolated island there. One day, she takes a walk, actually a small boat ride, and meets a backpacker who is living alone on a small, uninhabited island. Now, that's all I'm going to say with regard to the plot and characters, because there's actually quite a lot to spoil in this movie. I really had to think about what I wanted to say about Rage, because I wanted to completely avoid spoilers in this review. And I think I've successfully written a review that gives you just enough of what you need to know without going into too much detail. So right from the start, the story is a bit fragmented in its storytelling structure, because it jumps back and forth between the three plots. So you kind of have to pay attention early on to keep up with what's going on in the film. After about 20 or so minutes, the stories become very easy to follow, because by that time you're familiar with which characters are in each story. So as it continues to jump between the three stories throughout the entire runtime, you still know exactly what story you're in as the characters are shown on screen. There's a lot of suspense in this movie, as you might expect, and that suspense is generated from feeling anxious and worried for all of the characters. If you were to guess who the killer is, if they made it too obvious, then your concern for the characters in the other stories would dissipate, right? Because they would then be theoretically safe from the killer. But this movie does not allow you to do that. It doesn't. You remain anxious for everyone throughout the entire runtime, and every scene has kind of an underlying tension beneath the surface, because you don't know which characters are interacting with this killer. And even more interestingly, there's a flip side to that, and it's one of the main themes of the film. The flip side of the coin is that you will begin to care about the three main suspects, one of which is, of course, the killer. So the script could have kind of taken the easy way out and simply portrayed these three guys as like really creepy, wafer-thin characters, but it doesn't. So there's a lot of multidimensionality to the characters in this movie, and that's arguably its greatest strength. Actually, Rage subverts a lot of expectations going into it. It's a murder mystery premise that does not operate like a murder mystery at all. What I mean by that is that it does not focus all of its efforts into like aggressively tricking you with regard to the killer's identity, because it has so many other characters and themes to develop along the way. So this kind of helps the film to progress in a very natural way, I think. But don't get me wrong, because the killer is an important element to this, but so is everyone else. There's also some hard-hitting social commentary and themes that are presented, which I'll let you discover for yourself. One particular thing, though, that I need to point out is that there's one scene, there's a few scenes that are pretty hard to sit through. You know, this is not a particularly violent film, so you don't have to worry about that. But there are a few scenes that will disturb you. So just keep that in mind. The director here is Sang-il Lee, who we covered in my Asian horror playlist, actually, because he previously directed one of the Kaiden Horror Classics films from 2010. He also directed Hula Girls from 2006, which was very popular, I think, in its home country. I thought it was just pretty good. And then he also directed Villain from 2010, which I thought was very impressive. However, I do think that Rage is probably his best film to date, at least from what I've seen. So Rage online, I would not recommend checking reviews of this out yet until after you've seen it, but it does get overwhelmingly positive reviews on the internet, which is nice. But there's one criticism that pops up from time to time, and that's related to the ending, which I won't spoil. But some people seem to think that the characters show too much emotion at the end of the movie, and that emotion is portrayed for too long of a time. Okay? I can understand where they're coming from, but I don't feel that way at all, because that whole finale sequence is entirely earned with character development, and I think it really worked on a dramatic level. So that's the one criticism that I've seen, and I do not necessarily agree with it. And finally, the aforementioned cast is star-studded, and everyone in this movie brings their A game. There is not one weak performance in this film. I don't even know if I could even single out the best performance. It's a great introduction to some of the younger acting talent in Japan as well. There's a lot of good acting in this movie. Going through all of their filmographies now would just take forever, so I'll include a list in the description box below, and feel free to explore them. Maybe I'll include a few movies as well, a few recommendations from their filmography to get started. So Rage is currently available on Region 3 DVD with English subtitles, and I definitely recommend it. Not the most enjoyable film per se, but it's really interesting and really well made. And before I leave you, actually I wanted to mention that the Asian horror playlist will continue this coming Friday. We're going to begin our exploration of 2011, so be sure to check that out when I post it. And as always, I will see you next time.